All right, and we are live. Welcome to another episode of Absolute AppSec. This is episode number 3, and tonight we're joined by Jerry Gamblin. There's Jerry. I think when it comes to Jerry, he's played a lot of I would call it blue team defense. He's got a lot of good insights. We're gonna talk about some of his thoughts on things like bug bounties tonight. And but if you've watched Jerry online on his Twitter account, or you've watched some of the GitHub repos he's thrown up, Jerry, you're always messing with something. Like for a while there, you're hammering on Docker, but it seems like you'll go hide for a weekend and write code and surface on Monday with some cool project you did over the weekend.
That's the plan. Like that's the way I learn, right? It's like, here's something I don't know about. Let me go and figure out security. Let me write some code that's probably not going to work the best, and then move on to the next thing. Docker was fun for 6 months, and now I'm on to the cloud.
So which is better? Do you prefer Docker? Do you prefer the cloud? I mean, we should probably let you give a good introduction of yourself too, right? I mean, we're both impressed, obviously, but go ahead and give us a rundown.
So I'm Jerry Gamblin. I run the technical security team at a company that sells car data. It's not that hard to figure it out if you have Google, but yeah. So I just kind of help them move securely as we go from our data centers to the cloud to whatever's next. So I'm always getting to play with new things and big data. So it's fun to be in that world, and it's fun to try to move at the speed of business versus trying to move at the speed of government, which was my last gig.
I don't even think you want to get I guess thoughts. I'm actually curious. Like, what are your thoughts on government?
Surprisingly enough, my background, I haven't done a lot of government work, right? I know in some of the consulting businesses that I've been in, I've done a project here and there, and I was never super impressed with going into that space and trying to perform some sort of an application security assessment. It was just always almost an afterthought. But with your background and Jerry's background, you probably have more insight into that and how it actually operates, as opposed to what I can speak more to the banking sector.
The financial sector.
Yeah, the financial sector than I can to the government sector.
Or fraud. You can speak to that. So Jerry, in a nutshell, what was your experience with the government? I can certainly give mine, but if you're willing to share, we'd love to hear yours.
Mine's just the government's no budget all the time you can use for a project, and business is no time and all the budget you can use for a project most of the time. So it's almost flipped, right? Like, I haven't found that perfect, you have enough time to do the project and all the budget you need, right? So if you guys know any industries that's like that, that's probably where I should land next.
I'd say mine's probably more cynical than that. Basically, in my experience with government, not GS, but government contracting, is that it was kind of a race to the bottom at times. Basically, you've got the same people rotated through different companies, each company trying to bid less, so therefore pay less. And yeah, that's just my experience. So left that world a while back, and never looking back. Not a fan of working. Not to say anything against those that do work in that industry. It's just not for me. So, and I'm sure that everybody's experiences vary, but that was mine. So,
yeah, it's probably got to depend a lot on the division that you're working for, and the experience that you're getting in there. I would, like any large organization.
Yeah.
But, if you don't have the money to actually do any of the projects, it's very difficult. And that's in the consulting space, that's what I found, is they typically didn't necessarily want to pay up as much, right, for the activities that the commercial industries would pay for. I mean, I think that's what Jerry's getting at with they have no money, right?
That makes sense. Sorry, I'm reading some of the live chat comments. I just got in there, and I think that they're temporal. So I'm fairly certain that if there were live chat questions asked other than the one I see here, just one, then like I guess I'm saying ask them again. So. Oh, and you know what? By the way, I should probably point out, if you can't tell, so Seth is out of Utah, by the way, and I'm in Virginia, and Seth happens to be out here, and so we're at my kitchen table tonight, podcasting from the same room. So,
Utah, by the way.
Probably
Well, that was
all the time.
What was that?
sorry. I accidentally streamed the live stream I was on. So.
Yeah, that happens. I'm trying to. Usually, I've got like an external monitor to watch all this stuff, and so like live chat, the watch page, and then this Hangout screen. But tonight it's all in one. So trying to keep up with everything and checking emails and all that. So, anyways, so yeah, I mean, I know we got a few topics to get into tonight, Jerry. But let's start off with the one I think that is like near and dear to your heart. And I know Seth and I both have stories as well, so it should be an interesting topic, which is bug bounties. So, Jerry, what do you think of bug bounties?
That's an interesting question. I think that they have their place. I think that you need to separate a bug bounty from a disclosure program, a place for people to tell you about your vulnerabilities. But a bug bounty, as they're kind of constructed now in the Uber model, I don't know who they're fair to. Like, so you have a researcher, you only pay them when they find something. You have a company who is paying out, mostly from what I've seen of people I talk to, low-level bugs. So the only people who seem to really be making money on this are the people running the programs, the hacker ones, the bug crowds, those companies. So it's kind of one of those things. I understand what you need them for. I just haven't seen anybody who's willing to say that they have had a great experience with them.
That's fair. And what I'll say is, so like I had no from your perspective, from like the defensive side until last like 4 months, on like having a bug bounty program, working with researchers, working with the bug bounty, and it's no secret. Like the company I work for markets it, HackerOne markets it, and what I'll say is like there's definitely like a percentage of like duplicate submissions, out of scope submissions, some that are just straight up like automated spam, just cruft. And then there are ones that are like, oh, that's interesting, and sometimes even like a little out of scope, but interesting nonetheless. And then there are submissions that are like, hey, that's a really valid submission. We pay pretty well to the researcher. Now, that having been said, I just see what we award the researcher. Like, I don't like obviously see what the researcher gets. I would hope that it's the same amount that we're, telling them that we're paying out, but I don't know. Like, I don't run I don't know how much it costs us. I don't know any of that. So just from somebody who's triaging these on a daily basis, like you definitely get a good percentage of cruft, but then like you do definitely get some good submissions, and depending on the company, like obviously some companies pay better than others. But what I'll say from the flip side of that, and like I know you can speak to this from the researcher side of it.
Yeah.
So like both Seth and I did participate in like a white glove bug bounty, or did, and still did. And like what I'll say is that honestly, as a professional, you can, And by the way, when I say white glove bug bounty, I mean these are actual professionals who've been vetted, not just anybody who can sign up off the internet. There's like an interview process, background checks, all that. And but what I can say is like it's cool if you like want to just spend 4 hours or whatever. But in terms of like being a big money maker, no. Like I mean, you and I mean, easily anybody who's done this, Jerry, yourself, who wants to pick up 1099 work because somebody needs an assessment done or needs whatever, like you can do that in, 1 week, 2 week project and make a hell of a lot more than a bug bounty.
Yeah, the amount of time. That's what it comes down to is like the time to pay out trade-off is what I have a hard time justifying, right? Is, I can go teach a training course, I can go, do 1,000 other things. So yeah, the bug bounty is, interesting to me, especially the white glove ones where it is more vetted. You do see you do see more interesting projects in there than probably some of the public ones.
Yeah, it's enjoyable.
Yeah. And I mean, there's interesting things that are popping up. But then I also start to wonder about the quality of the bugs again, even from the white glove, and what's actually getting pushed in. Number one, it's traditionally got the time frame around it. It's not like an open-ended bug bounty like a lot of the big companies run. So, a 2-week assessment, if I've already engaged, I'm already doing something else, I'm probably going to ignore it, even though it's a white glove service, because it's not my only source of income. And then it's also a race to release your bug is really what it feels like. Yeah,
I mean, you're definitely, because that's a good point. When these come out, you got to hammer it. If new functionality is released and you get a notice on it, or if new targets come out, then you have to jump on it. And you got soccer practice. I've got my kids' karate. I've got my things going on. So it's like hard to jump on that.
Well, we got a good comment on that. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Jerry.
I was saying there's like 8 other people doing the same thing, right? So somebody is wasting their cycles at the end of that, right? So it just doesn't seem, I understand the pay for results thing, but I don't think, it'd be interesting to see a good study if you took the amount of time, what a bug bounty researcher actually makes per bug, right? Like if you broke down that kind of fluff time that, that they're looking and didn't find anything. Because at the end of the day, if you spend 4 hours and don't find anything, you've made $0. But, nobody has a way to justify that. The person running the research program, the company with the bounty program can't say, I had somebody look at this for 4 hours, because those hours are just lost to them. The researcher just goes to bed tired with no money. So nobody wins in that situation.
Yeah, it's got to be frustrating to both, to all parties, like you said. Like some of the stuff I've seen, basically, there's no way it didn't take a lot of time. When I say like a lot of time, at least a week of, a week or 2 weeks for the really good bugs, for the ones that pay out for as much as just saying like, hey, I'm going to do a week of testing where I know for a fact I'm going to get paid at the end of the day. So I don't know. I'd be curious to hear if anybody watching this has done a bug bounty and is professionally, has the option of doing a 1099, but for whatever reason prefers the bug bounty. I'd be interested in hearing that for sure.
Yeah, somebody had a good comment about the bug bounties are good for the countries or the people that are in countries where the cost or the cost of living isn't as great, right? For example, in India, thanks for that. Because that's absolutely right. And I think we do see quite a few of those reports coming out of places that aren't the traditional, security space, at least in the US. Right?
Oh, yeah. No, definitely. You're right. And then and by the way, I want to back up for a second. When I said white glove, because there can be some confusion there. And actually, I'm curious if you've had this, Jerry. Like, white glove can also mean through those bug bounties. Like some people use the term interchangeably for bug bounties that are your bug crouch, your hacker ones that anybody can sign up. But then that's a service within those companies where they basically filter out all the cruft for you, do as much validation as they can before submission actually gets up to you. Because if you're on a 1, 2, 3 person team, like that's I mean,
yeah, we do validation services through our bounty provider, and it's nice. It still gets to the point though that it's hard, right? Like you do get those 3 or 4 bugs a year, and you're like, wow, that's an amazing bug. Like that person deserves the time. And then the other times it's it's stuff you missed. If you miss input validation, you'll figure that out pretty quick. Or if you have something like and you're right, it's hard, right? Because if you release a new something in scope, it's going to get a lot of submissions right up front. And we don't have a big team, and it's not only me, but the people I've talked to, the problem that they have with bug bounties is the cycles. Because when do your bugs come in on your bug bounty programs?
I mean, for us, it is Monday through Monday, but when you talk about like massive amounts, yeah, it's pretty much what you'd expect, Friday through Monday, right? Like those are the heaviest times of the week where you see submissions.
Yep. So Friday through Monday, and then on big breaks, right? Like over Christmas, like the holidays, you get those. And it's not the security team as much as it is the dev teams, because you're signing your dev teams up for getting called in for stuff, and they're like, so we run this bounty program and somebody found this on the day after Christmas, so I have to get called in. And while it's their job, they don't see that as a net positive a lot of times.
Yeah, that can be well, okay. And here's what I'll say, like helps. If because you can do with these bounties, you can do like common responses, right? So to like quickly send a response saying like, hey, this is whatever, like it's out of scope, it's known, it's whatever. We handle it in this way. So you can do that. And then you can also automate with like chat ops and various, I mean, that's the one I know of, chat ops to tackle it, but still it doesn't alleviate the fact that when you are like, is this real? It takes time. It takes time to look through and say like, if it's not obvious, just like completely obvious, you can throw it away. It can be time consuming. And again, like if you've got the team for it, cool. But if you don't, I don't honestly know how, like, I don't know how you're doing, how you're dealing with it. So.
Yeah. I mean, from a researcher perspective, I mean, obviously, like we're getting quite a bit of uptake when researchers actually have the time and they're viewing it as a side moneymaker, right?
Right.
You've got like a lot of people that are moonlighting that are probably in the security industry or already doing something. And so that's where the bug bounty programs are like pointing people at different locations. So number one, when it starts, when it first comes out, it's like, it's got to take over your life if you want to get that initial wave of funding or whatever that's coming out of that company. And then number two, you've really got to dig in. I mean, what I found is I log in, and if there's not anything that's like really obvious low-hanging fruit that I can start to pick at within the first half an hour, and this is where the value prop comes in for me, is it's like, all right, I'm going to move on because there's another 50 of them that I can go look at.
Yeah, you got a little checklist. And I've heard that too, where there's like, so the most successful bug bounty hunters have a checklist, and then that's what they go off of. And they're like, boom, does this site, does this app have it? One by one. And if, one of those might pop, and then it becomes worth it. But if you don't have that checklist and you're kind of not like going from one to one, you have to focus and really like pare down on how does the app, I mean, it's just like when we do tests, right? We got to understand how an application works first. Like that's the most important thing. Like what is the business purpose for this? Because that's where you find your most interesting, authorization bugs. And those are the kinds of things and you discover more functionality, and maybe there's more points of attack within the application because you've gone through and discovered how everything works and where everywhere is that where you can go. So
yeah,
time. It's just time.
Yeah, it is. And I don't feel like it's not necessarily a bad thing, But I do find that there's that long tail of vulnerabilities, as I call them, that are like the not the low hanging fruit, but the stuff that is, it's not high severity or it's not high risk. And it's probably a good thing for most people to take care of that in most applications. But the bug bounties just aren't concerned, right? They don't necessarily they don't care about it.
Give me 1 sec. Lucy. Shh. Sorry. This is what you get when you're at my house.
Yeah, we've got a cat running around.
She's a Bahraini Dillman cat. And if you know anything about those cats, they're crazy. And
this is Jerry's cat. I blame Jerry.
It's Jerry's fault. Yeah. So we don't hear anything. Yeah.
So what I missed, and I would always pay for, is the ability to have a researcher run a bug bounty program where I could pay him for his time, right? Because having the time, like if say you had that one person who was just killer on cross-site scripting or authorization bugs, paying for him for his time to have him hit your web app to say, no, I couldn't get in, is just as valuable as paying. Paying for negatives sometimes is just as valuable as paying for a positive, right? Like, don't tell me where my web app's broken, but somehow prove to me that you spent 2 hours or 4 hours, trying to get in my web app, and I'll be happy to pay you. Just like, the same reason you pay somebody who's doing 1099 web app consulting, I would almost be willing to pay a researcher for that, right? I would be.
As long as they're reputable, right? As long as they're reputable, and it is the same. It is, and that's the thing. Is like it's basically 1099, But
because you ask people who run bug bounty programs, like, how often do researchers look at your website? And most of them can't give you, so you got 10 bugs. Was that 1,000 hours worth of somebody of the community looking at your website, or was that 100 hours? What's your time, right? When you do a regular AppSec consulting gig, I know, like, okay, so this is a 3-week gig, so 120 hours. At the end of the time, I get to report and say, okay, they found 5 bugs. So, we're doing pretty good. So you can kind of start to judge how secure you're by bugs to time spent, right? And you want that to get less and less. So at some point, I know not everybody's this way, but if I send an app out to be tested and it comes back with 3 bugs, I'm not mad that I spent all that money for them to find 3 bugs. I'm like, yeah, we're doing a much better job now, right?
That's an interesting coming from the consulting side. Jerry, that's great to hear, right? But from the consulting side, there's kind of nothing more demoralizing to a consultant, especially like the junior level that haven't been around the block, haven't been on a dev team, to get into an app and then say, they only find one thing, right?
It's not just junior. That's straight up depression at times for.
If you've seen the comic with the graph on like what a pen test is like, it's like the whole thing is like, oh, I suck. Wow, I found all this stuff and I don't have time to document it, right? And that's really what happens. But to your point though, like when I've been embedded in an organization, that's what I want to see. I want to see the number of bugs in my code decrease over time, right? It's kind of a weird dichotomy because, on the one hand, who do you want to disappoint most? Do you want the security researcher or the security consultant to be disappointed, or do you want the developers to? You don't want to add more to their plate that doesn't really have anything to do with their job, or you don't want to add like extra bugs. And that's why I get like the bug bounties. They always have like a list of, hey, guess what? We don't care about security headers, or we don't care about
out of scope stuff. But the list gets so long at times that I'm like, all right, maybe they should at least acknowledge that it's there, right? That's one place that you could probably get the feedback that someone has spent time on your application. Yeah. But again, you've got to have somebody in the organization to be able to take care of that, or you have to pay the bug bounty runner for them to actually go in and check that stuff out, right? At some level, somebody's got to triage those bugs. Yeah, at a certain point, with that out of scope list, it becomes almost like if you're not sending like some of these are, if you're not basically sending remote code execution, command injection, SQL injection, whatever injection, basically anything that's not like serious pwnage, like you completely can wreck this app, then like it's out of the scope. And that's not all, but it's definitely some.
But then there wouldn't be anybody in scope, right? Like coming from the other side, like people are missing their headers. They don't have their headers on there because they're hard to put on legacy apps. So if you took those companies out, like if you just use that as a walk-in module, right? Like if you have to have a list of stuff out of scope that big, you probably shouldn't be running a bug bounty program, right? So then you start cutting things down, because I'm under the impression that the number of companies that should be running bug bounty programs are is probably 10% of the ones that do, right? Because you do see those lists, right? And that means that they have all that, because those exclusion lists are just technical debt lists that they haven't got, right? Like,
it's the bug list straight out of GitHub.
just change it from out of scope to technical debt. I like it. It's a good way to look at it.
No, and I was going to reiterate. I think you're right as far as like the companies that are running the bug bounty. I mean, I realize that those companies have got to make their margins and things on top of that as well, and they do provide the platform. They hook people up, but the interesting thing in being in one of the white glove or the invite only services is that a lot of the big companies that I have seen come through there, yes, they totally should be running a bug bounty, but the applications that get pushed to the bug bounty are those legacy applications, right? And they want to figure out what their risk is, but hey, guess what? We know that all of this stuff is, hey, we know that injection is a huge problem with this application. You can't necessarily take that off the table, right? Because of the attack vector. But some of those other things I still look at when I'm researching an app, because it does point me in certain directions for other things that they've probably done, right?
And then I don't know if you guys even want to get into this, but the S3 bucket on Uber, right? Like that just opened up such a huge issue with them and researchers, and did that violate the California Notification Act and what that does? Like you see people all over the map on what that does.
Oh yeah, so that was when I don't know if they ever made it clear or if anyone knows, but so there was S3 bucket. Didn't they obtain a key off wherever their code was stored, and then access from somewhere. From the cloud, they got a key, and then they accessed S3, and then demanded. Did they so was it? I don't actually know. Was it like a pay us this 50,000 or whatever it was, and then like you get your data back?
I don't think they ever released that email, and I don't think the FBI ever arrested that guy. So from my understanding, like, dang, it was blackmail. It wasn't like go pick this. He's trying to not look at his laptop to make sure that. So that was the last I saw of it. But the interesting stuff that I saw floating around was, if they run a public program, put it out there on the internet, how do you say that everybody who's in this public program is right? Because the California law says if anybody who's not, who doesn't give permission to look at data access is alert. So that ended up being a pretty big.
We always used to joke about that when I was working for a bank, right? That the best way to get around all those regulations was we were just going to open up the database and release it, and then notify all the customers and say, guess what? The data's out there. And then we don't have to worry about compliance for everything, which is basically what Uber gets to do now, right? Is that, I mean, not really, but it was just like the compliance regs were so strict. But to your point, Jerry, the fact that you don't necessarily vet all of those bug bounty participants or the researchers can be a huge problem.
Yeah, definitely.
I mean, I'm I'm sure it's keeping the lawyers in the money for HackerOne and Bug Crowd, right?
Yeah. Well, that's probably where, it's expensive. I'm sure it's expensive to operate a bug bounty company, like for that exact reason. There's legal fees, marketing. You and I have run a business before. Like it gets expensive.
Yeah.
And I'm not begrudging anybody making money on bug bounties. Like it's the same way. Like when I get in an Uber, like sometimes you feel sorry for the Uber guy because you realize that your $50 ride from the airport, he's getting $20 of, right? $25 of, like at the end of the day. So it's just that same kind of strategy, right? Like that's just where my feelings on this subject.
Oh no, and I don't know. Like I hope nobody out there thought that. I know we don't. But yeah, like and then the one thing with that is that everybody likes. I'm just gonna say it. A lot of people like to shit on Uber because of all the things that have come out. So like when that whole thing went down, it was like a dog pile right on top of them, and I was like, okay, so on this note, my wife just like 2 days ago sends me a text and was like, "Oh my God, it was like a hospital or a healthcare. They paid X amount to hackers." She was like, "I can't believe they paid it," and I'm like, "That shit happens all the time, like all the time. Like it sometimes makes it public and it sometimes doesn't." And I'm not commenting on whether that's right or wrong, but it happens. And I don't know. I feel like before all the details were out, people are just jumping on them because that's what they do.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's the whole industry likes to shame, right? Who was that? Grifter Neil Weiler, in one of his talks, spoke about this, the fact that, whenever something like that happens, a big public breach, rather than sharing data or like trying to go figure out why they got breached, the first thing that most of the community does is be like, oh, did we get hacked? Did we get hacked? No, ha ha ha! You did. You screwed everything up, right? Yeah. I mean, we point blame, and instead of actually taking it and learning from what's going on. I mean, the guys that are in the trenches at those companies most likely had nothing to do with that S3 bucket, right?
Oh no, yeah.
They had nothing to do with it.
No,
but now they've got this mark of shame, even though they shouldn't, right?
Right.
And realistically, they don't because it wasn't their fault. But that's our snap judgment, especially on Twitter. That's what you see pop up pretty quick. It's almost sophomoric. It's pretty.
Yeah.
Ethics kind of rule the day in security. You see this all the time. It's like, oh, you should never pay a ransomware, right? Like, no, you don't do it. This runs it out. And then, if your grandma infects her Windows 7 machine and loses all her pictures, you're over there helping her get the Bitcoins to pay the ransom, right? Like, we do that all the time. It's okay to say this should be the ethics for everybody until it's your company, and it's like, yeah, maybe we'll write that $50,000 check.
Well, yeah, they're super smart about their calculations on how much you'll pay, right?
Oh,
it's a personal device, and they'll come in. I mean, I know we're getting on to ransomware here, but they're very intelligent about it, and they've got super good customer service, right? They respond quickly. They'll show you where to go to buy your Bitcoin.
It's a business.
They'll apologize to you. Oh, I'm sorry that this happened to you, right? I mean, it's better than most companies. I mean, that are out there that you have to deal with on a daily basis.
Roll back.
I mean, we can judge, but we shouldn't be.
To roll back to S3 for a minute. While we're on this, like, I just kind of had an epiphany the other day, and I threw together some scripts that will spin up about between 60 and 200 common S3 bucket names for your company. So you just run the scripts and it just creates empty secured S3 buckets, because what I've seen is, if you have your company name /backup, that's where bug bounties and hackers go to look for open buckets. So it's better as a security team just to squat on as many of those as you can.
Yeah, I saw that script you wrote. And again, going back to like the stuff you'll just write over a weekend. And I think it was like this, was it yesterday or something along those, like it was recent, and you just said, hey, here's this thing I built. And it was a list of basically a way to randomize those bucket names and all that. Sorry, I'm saying all that because I'm trying to plug in a battery thing. A battery thing, technical term.
Battery thing. Power is what it's called.
Power. I've heard. But
yeah, that's 3 buckets will end up getting you because everybody knows where to look for, and and they're universal names. So if you can stop somebody from in your company or from using it, you might as well lock it down.
Yeah, and any of those services or any of those scripts that you run, that's the super useful thing that I find about a lot of the stuff that you're producing is the usability factor, right? It's not necessarily, hey, I'm going out and I'm looking at bug bounties for this. I'm looking at what is my threat profile, right? And that's where you can tell you're on the defensive side as you're thinking more about that, right? And I appreciate that as well, because most of the tools that we see from the information security side are those offensive tools. They don't care about the aftermath. They're not looking to productionalize something or actually run it again and again on a weekly basis to discover things. Or if they are, they're holding that close to the chest because they're in a bug bounty program and they want to have that advantage over people rather than releasing it out to the community, right?
Yeah, I go back and forth between like sometimes I just want to mess stuff up, and sometimes I want to, all the time professionally defend. But there's definitely like those times where I just want to mess stuff up. So thank you to the Jerrys of the world for building some of those defensive tools, which kind of like while we're talking about S3 and we're talking about the cloud, because I know Jerry, you had some additional thoughts on I think it was like. I don't know if it was the last episode. It was the first episode. We were talking about basically it was about people getting into the industry. And we had talked a little bit about, like Seth's programming background, pre-security, mine being like network engineering, and my own programming on my own time. And I think what you want to you kind of want to expand upon that and talk about what a full stack security person looks like. And, to lead off that conversation, what I'll say is and I think I've been saying this for 4 or 5 years, especially working with Chris Gates on all these like talks and tools that we've done, is that like he was NetSeg, I'm AppSec, but like our worlds, we found like when it comes to infrastructure as code, then being pushed to machines in the cloud, and like the worlds of NetSec and AppSec sort of merging, because now you've got DevOps and you've got, like I said, infrastructure as code. I do agree that you absolutely have, like, to be good, you have to have, and to like evolve, you have to have that kind of full stack approach. But interested to hear you expand upon that a little bit.
I think it's just being full stack doesn't mean you know the full stack. It means you're willing to learn the full stack. I was reading something today, and it was like, what was the weirdest interview you were ever at? And it said a developer went in, and the technical part of the interview was building a Tomcat server, right? They like set them down in front of a laptop and said, here's an AWS console. We'll be back in an hour. Build a Tomcat server. And anybody who can be a developer should be able to find a guide on Google and spin up a reasonably successful Tomcat server in an hour, right? Art Apache server. And it's to jump through all those hoops, right? Because that's the only way you're going to be successful in any technology industry, in the coming future. Yeah, I know there are going to be a few companies where you can be the switch guy, right? Like you'll be the one guy who turns on switches and set up QoS. But most companies are moving to the fact where that you do everything, right? From build the server to deploy the server to write the server, right? And you have to be able to handle all those roles. And it's just amazing the amount of people that just are either scared or just don't want to put in the time and effort to be able to not only build, but be able to secure multiple layers in a stack.
So let me get your thoughts on this. There are two main schools of thought that I've like seen, and they're both hugely at odds with one another. One is that you need to be given the time at work to learn those things, and the other is you need to learn that on your own time. Where do you stand on that? Or what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out how to say this because I think that people who want to work 9 to 5 are fine, and I think that, but you can only do so much in that time frame, and you're not going to be able to learn, and you're going to fall behind, right? And I think it's a little bit of both, and to kind of actually wrap back around to the bug bounty and the gig-based economy. That's why I'm kind of glad I have a full-time job, right? Because there's been days where I spent 4 hours on something, and at the end of the 4 hours, I'm like, well, that was stupid. None of this worked. And, and I got paid for those 4 hours, right? Like whatever my salary is, I got paid for those 4 hours. And if I was on a gig-based or whatever, it would have been like, oh, that's stupid. Well, I guess I'm not, buying shoes this month or whatever I would have done with that, right? So I think that it's a little bit of both. I mean, I think you have to be passionate to get to a certain point, but I also think that your company should provide the resources to allow you to explore on time, right? Like I know my company provides professional development time, which is 4 hours a week. So,
oh, nice.
Yeah, and that's higher than I've seen in some companies, right? I mean, I know you've got your Googles of the world where 20% of your time or whatever is supposed to be spent on projects and professional development or something outside of your day-to-day job. But I always kind of go back to if you're passionate about it, it bleeds into everything.
Yeah, I mean, that's true. It does.
Especially as you're getting started in a community, I mean, it's a lot easier to do as a college student or 20-year-old professional than it is when you get older and you have more responsibilities and more family and things like that. But I still find, like having been in the community for that long, that there are times that I get into a project and it goes for 8 hours a night, right? And it's just part of being in the community and learning a new technology. And if you're excited about it, it doesn't feel like any time at all.
Yeah, like if you want to do it.
Yeah.
Not forced to do it.
Yeah. Yep. So there's two different things. And sometimes your job won't necessarily lead you into that, right? No. Not everyone has that flexibility that Jerry does for 4 hours a week to go trace this stuff down. And so if it is something that you want to learn more about, you're going to have to take the initiative and find the time.
Yeah. I mean, I'm kind of with you guys. Here's the distinction, like for me, is that if it's like work related, like you should be given some training, right? Like some time to like the typical thing you'll see in a consultancy is, hey, we want you to test this app with a language you've never, like do a code review on a language you've never seen before.
Yeah.
Right.
That's never happened.
Yeah.
Never.
And if you're passionate, you're going to learn that by like Monday over your weekend, right? Like you see that. That's exploitation, in my opinion. That's exploitation. However, I can honestly say I consider myself to be, and you and Jerry to be in pretty good places in our careers. And, I definitely can say that I wouldn't be in that position if I didn't like say, hey, I'm interested in this. I mean, I do it now, right? Like I've got a little e-Kindle. I've got books, learning a new programming language as we speak, writing a side project, doing, you and I doing this podcast. I mean, like Jerry is building tools left and right, digging into new technologies. Yeah. We all do that because we're interested in it and because we like it. And certainly helps to be that full stack as Jerry's kind of pointing to, and definitely helps elevate your career. But I think what I get like concerned with is when people say, well, if you're passionate enough. And that's where it gets to be a little bit of, like I said, kind of exploitation, when it's like, if you're passionate enough over the weekend, you'll figure this out. Again,
well, you said something interesting, and you said, here's a task that you have to do, right? Like, and I think that's the line. If I say, if I give somebody a task that they have to complete over the weekend, that's not passion. That's not on their own time. That's work. If I give you a problem and that drives you into spending time on your own, that's what it's supposed to be, right? Like I take problems home to work on the weekend, and or like, okay, so here's the problem. We don't know how we're going to solve this, and my mind's just like, oh, I could do this or this or this or this, and then I come back on Monday and say, here's what I thought. And they're like, okay, that's not a problem here anymore. We're not going to do that. I don't feel like I've lost all that. I don't feel like I've lost all that time because I was interested. I was self-motivated to come up with a solution to a problem that was there. I wasn't like, hey, we need you to patch 4,000 servers and you'll do it over the weekend if you're, if you care about your job. That's two different things.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, when it's basically, it's your choice. You're interested. It's your choice. You want to do it. You because you like to do it. And I think we've all three, and I'm sure the viewers watching, have been in that situation and are in that situation pretty fairly regularly, or we're just like interested in a problem. I mean, that's sort of like how all of us kind of, I feel, probably came into security. We like, this is interesting, and we went that route. But yeah, when it's forced, I guess, is like when it becomes,
yeah. Even though it's interesting, or it may be interesting to you at some point, the second that it's a task and it's a job,
right?
I mean, there's something about your brain. It's no longer a carrot, or it's no longer as rewarding because it's not your choice. All it's become is, oh, great, this is something else that I have to do for work, and if I show up on Monday and it's not done, I'm going to be in trouble. So it's introducing more stress on a time that you probably needed to disconnect.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry.
No, we brought you on to talk, Jerry. So please.
No, I think you see that a lot, even like people who have to go to conferences for work versus people who get to go to conferences to enjoy the conference, right? Like you talk to people who are just flying out to work at a booth. That's not fun for them, right? That's a task. It's like, oh, you're going to Vegas. It's like, yes, I'm going to Vegas for the third time this year. This is no fun versus the kid who's going to DEF CON for his first time. And, they're both doing the same thing. It's just how you're doing it.
That's absolutely true. And I will say though, like after you've been to any conference, whether you're an attendee and have to work or not, any number of times, like after a while, well, I shouldn't say any conferences. I should say there are particular conferences that, especially for me, conferences in Vegas, that become a little taxing after 48 hours, we'll say 48 hours, anything over 72 hours becomes a little rough. But yeah, you're absolutely right. Like, because I've been there, and I know you've been there, where we're there to work booths, to make contacts, to provide visibility for the company, and there's nothing wrong with that. But it's definitely a different experience than.
It's definitely work.
Right, it's work. Yeah,
and you view it in a different light. I mean, some of the most enjoyable conferences that I've been to, like personally, are, oh, guess what? I wasn't there for work. I was there. I submitted, and I got to speak at something cool, and then I get to go enjoy the conference rather than having to worry about, hey, now I need to go make 200 contacts with people and try to promote business or something else on the other side, right?
Yeah,
but that's exactly to your point, Jerry. Is there's that fine line of what is work and what is tasked to you versus what you go and do on your own.
So, Jerry, let me ask you, what do you think when it comes to full stack, or it comes to, like, if you had to place a bet for the next 2 to 3 years on what security pros should be learning, like what's your list of things that are going to be important to what we call a full stack security person, somebody that bounces between, all kinds of.
That's the problem. I think the stack is collapsing, right? Like,
it's all code.
Everything's gonna be serverless, and so if you don't know a programming language, you better pick one up, and it better be Node or Go, right? Like, even when we're moving, right? It's like, oh, we're gonna go to the cloud, and just stuff naturally becoming serverless because that's the way, GCP and AWS are really pushing people is to go to their architecture. So it's just code, it's Lambda functions, and you really need to spend time to learn how to do that because there's always going to be those one-offs that are doing, Apache on a server in their data center, but more and more stuff's just going to become CloudFront.
Yeah, I agree. So
It's hard to argue.
yeah, it's hard to. I mean,
you're always going to have the legacy apps, like you said, but it's also almost a detriment nowadays to actually think you can pick up code that you've developed for one of those legacy architectures and drop it into the cloud and expect it to run efficiently, right, or cheaply. If you're really going to the cloud for the reasons that the cloud exists, which is, hey, scalability and expense and all the other things that they talk about, forklifting your app that's 10 years old isn't going to be effective.
Like for right now, you're right. Between serverless and the cloud and containerization, I think those are all, like, no doubt, things that we're all dealing with now, or a lot of us are dealing with now, and you probably will be dealing with if you're not, in the near future. But like, what interests me is VR. Like, because I forced myself to go to, I don't really like CNN.com, but I went to it anyways. I don't know why. And noticed they had like a whole VR section on their app. And yeah, I just think that's going to be an interesting area because, like, right now VR is, entertainment purposes and whatnot, but like, how long until you're with your doctor virtually, or you're doing something more sensitive, right, virtually? Like, probably not long.
And Slack has a VR plugin. Is that what you're saying? Right.
So this podcast is in VR.
Next week, Jerry, 3D.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's, to me, like, that might become a really interesting territory to kind of to see where the security of that goes, and what the implications will be, and like what other technologies will tie into VR, right?
Yeah, I don't know exactly what you mean by VR, but like, I know that, like, I worry about telemedicine, IoT stuff, right? Like, well, not VR. I know that, your doctor gives you, hey, here's a blood cuff monitor, right? Put this on, hit this button, and it uploads, your blood pressure so I can see it every morning so that I can monitor this. Or like,
that's exactly what I'm talking about. When I talk about virtual reality, like, that's exactly, imagine that tele doctor, but doing it, virtually with IoT devices. I mean, like, I can really see between IoT to like have sensory perception and, kind of like the environment's there with you, plus virtual reality. Like, I could see that getting pretty interesting from a security perspective. Like, it sounds like we're pretty much talking about the same thing. Is it?
Yeah, I mean, and I think that IoT is going to be huge, but I get, like, it's the data, right? I'm laughing because I'm looking because I have my Google Home sitting right here, right? Like,
hey, Google.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. And my son has it, and he asks it 30 times a day to tell it a joke and, like, to turn on his lights in its room, right? Like, it's his go-to thing, and he's just used to being there. And, in the future, that's just going to be more and more. And I think that's where a lot of, I can't wait for the first security bug that somebody finds in a Google Home app, right? Like, figuring out that you can say a command and it'll give you all the database passwords for somebody, right? Like, I really think that that's kind of the next level, because all that stuff's serverless too, right? Like, I don't know if you spent any time looking at those programming languages, but
yeah, because like Alexa, when you build it, oh damn it! So speaking of, I just turned it on.
Of course he did.
So someone is hooked up to, like you said, you can build a Lambda function, and then that's essentially how you plug in your someone to do something on the internet is like they're making a call off to Lambda.
Yeah.
So serverless.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, it's using all the Amazon APIs for language processing and everything behind the scenes, right? I mean, they've now exposed that all to developers outside of Amazon, but definitely that's an interesting space. I mean, even like today, didn't Apple just announced their HomePod or whatever, which is their Siri version of Google Home or your Echoes.
Isn't it amazing how much privacy we're willing to give up for convenience? It's seriously astonishing.
And we're willing to pay for it.
And I say we, like, I got one over there. Yeah, exactly. Willing to pay for it.
Yeah. Cool.
Mine's for just research, though.
Only research purposes. It's not hooked up to your garage door.
It definitely doesn't, like, tell me knock knock jokes, because that's not its purpose.
Well, we're at about, we're not quite at an hour. Jerry, you're still good to go for a little bit?
I'm good, yeah.
Cool. We had, I don't think we're gonna have time to get into it, because I think it's a topic that's a little bit lengthy, which is the whole OWASP top 10 debacle. And if anyone doesn't know what we're talking about, there was a lot of like back and forth about it. What'd you say? Like spring of last year it started.
Yeah.
Where there were two.
The list was released, like the list of new vulnerabilities was released. And maybe we'll push that to next week because I think the discussion is going to go longer. And I'm sure Jerry has opinions on that as well, though, right? You want to give us your hot take on the OWASP top 10?
Nobody has ever followed 10 rules ever.
Yeah, that's a good.
So,
yeah.
So it's too long. Like, every management class I've been to tell people about 3 things is about what they can do. So I'd be interested in what your, what your absolute AppSec top 3 is.
Definitely. Well, let's say authorization, like, is always a huge one. Just there's always problems with authorizations or with authorization. Here's the things you don't see as often anymore. Well, I don't see as often anymore. I don't about you, but SQL injection and cross-site scripting is always there. But like, I don't know, with CSP, there's things you can do to mitigate that. So authorization, insecure direct object reference, pretty common.
That's authorization, right?
Right.
So, I mean, my top 3. Right. I still find input validation, right, in general, right, whether that leads to injection or whether it leads to some other issue, like input validation is huge. And then the trust issues with authorization for sure. I don't know. I may have to think on that more because it varies week to week depending on what I'm seeing in different applications and when I'm dealing with people, right? I feel like our trust issues and our trust boundaries are just all screwed up, and we don't think about threats very well in the application space. We've got our top 10 list, and we go down that and we check off every one of those, and then we forget about like mass assignment or something like that because it's not on my top 10.
Which I was going to say, like logic flaws and things like that. But then with mass assignment, IDOR, logic flaws, a lot of times that comes down to authorization, not understanding the boundary.
And that's the one thing I don't like about the top 10 list, right? Even in this current forum, there's arguments on whether it's an awareness document or what it actually is specifying. It's not necessarily coding practices. Some of them are vulnerabilities. Some of them are processes, and realistically, we don't get down to the root of the problem, right? If it's for developers, it should go deeper than just saying cross-site scripting, right? It's got to be, there's got to be a root cause to that, to like input validation or something that they can actionably do something about, rather than just trying to prevent a one-off vulnerability.
Yeah, and there are so many MVC frameworks in use. I feel like there should be a list of here are the top types of things to look for views, for models, for controllers, because it doesn't matter if it's like, if it's Node and Express or well, I guess that's not the greatest example, but although they're often architected in that way. And then like Django, Rails. I mean, we did some work with MVC.NET or .NET MVC. What is there's another one I'm trying to think of. Well, it doesn't matter. All of those share the same type of like authorization issues at the controller, right? Pretty common. Models, mass assignment, injection through concat. Although with Django, probably less frequent, but still, like you can still introduce, even with an ORM, an ORM or active record pattern, you can still introduce injection. But there's validations that these models provide. And when you go talk about input validation, like when you talk about attributes that get stored in a database, right? Like you can perform those validations, and often times they're not done well within those models. So you could list that. And then with views, it's, you know, the typical stuff. It's like the XSS, putting too much logic inside of the view, things like that.
And I'm gonna go and just blow this up because I think the top three aren't even technical, right? Like I think their ownership. Like, tell me who owns all the code in your company, and I bet I would give you guys till next week to find one company of any size that could walk through their Git repo and say, okay, this team is responsible for this line, this team is responsible for this line, and find no orphans, right? Like that's one. And then, you know, documentation. Like I've worked with a bunch of companies and none of them have fully documented. You're like, okay, can you give me all the endpoints this app has? They're like, here's the war. You can see yourself, right? Like we don't know because somebody wrote one and then left, like an endpoint, and then maintenance, right? Like I think so many companies are running so fast, they don't get the maintenance cycles they need to take care of their software. So and you guys might have, because you guys have been around way more developers than I have. I have not met a developer who will say, "Oh no, I think input validation's dumb. I didn't want to put an input validation library." They're like, "Yeah, I'd love to do that, but here's my sprint for this week. I'm tagged up. I don't have any time to do this." Right? Like, it's not that they're maliciously not doing this stuff or don't even know about it. It's that they don't have the cycles to
or the library that library requires broke some of their other libraries, but it comes down to what you're saying, not having cycles, like to troubleshoot that or to figure it out or whatever. It gets prioritized differently than, like, say, a feature that's going to make money.
Yeah, I mean, to your, you know, exactly what you're saying. Even just like within the last week, I've had discussions with developers, and we've been talking about their code. They're very security conscious, and you know, they're deploying a microservice architecture where they have like hundreds of microservices that to support their application. And when I start to talk to them, I'm like, okay, so where do you see problems? They can point me directly to those services that have SQL injection in them. They know that they're not using, like in the node space, they're not using SQLize like they should be, right? It's all raw queries, and they've never been pointed out. They've never been given the ability to go in and actually fix the code or the time to do that. So unless they're going to go do it in their off time, it's just not going to happen. The company doesn't value that high enough. I mean, that's almost like an awareness issue for not necessarily developers, but executives and other people. Like, it's a risk discussion that needs to be had.
Well, and maybe that's a topic for next time, but how do you sit in a planning meeting and saying, going back and putting in this SQL injection, you know, this input validation library for SQL is more valuable to the company than you know, building this new feature without doing the, oh no, everything could break and it could be the end of the world. Like, because at the end, you can do that once or twice a year. You can have one or two stand on the table and yell moments a year and not get fired. But if you go to every meeting and say security is more important than building a new feature, you're not going to be employed very long.
No, you're absolutely, you're right.
Thankfully, I pick where I work now very carefully for that reason. So I don't have to deal with that my day to day, but used to see that. I mean, that's common. And consulting, we'd walk into how many places and
I mean, how many places that we would go year after year and find the same things.
Yeah. Right? It was like, they're like, oh yeah, that was, I mean, you could literally go through last year's report and just say like, I'm going to test all these things. And you're like, oh my God, this is like the same report from last year, except for also new things. Like
because I had more time. Like I spent another 80 hours on the app and I just like expanded the list.
Right.
So
they just never get the time to actually do that.
So what should those companies be doing? Like let's ask two of the best AppSec security guys I know. If you run that back, when do you say, hey, let me spend this 80 hours to do X to help you improve? What do you tell a company?
I mean, gosh, I mean, like, because my answer is going to be so cliche, but let's back up. Like, where do you need help, right? Like in 80 hours, you're not going to. Actually, let me figure out what you're asking. Are you asking, so what do we say based off the report, or what do we say like as a company? Here's what our thoughts are. Like, on
so if you know that you're going to run the same report back, when do you say like, okay, let's not spend this X amount of dollars to run this report back again because I know you didn't fix anything. Let me come in and provide X service instead that'll move your company forward. What service is that?
We started doing, fixing people's code for them, which is not always like, as consultants, that's like one thing we realized was like, hell, if you don't have the cycles, pay us, we'll implement security patches. And like, if you like it or you want to tweak it and pull it into your code base, cool. Otherwise, like, that's helpful, but that's not a long-term solution. And it's not scalable. Right. So, it just depends. It really does depend. I shouldn't say it's not scalable. What I should say is I'd rather have the developers long-term making their own patches. Like, I'd rather them just fix these issues, right? If it is the developer, sometimes it's not, like with headers and things like that. It's actually outside of the developer purview, but it's no easy answer there. I think that it's not fixing your code for you, plus some training to try and get those folks up to snuff so they can do this for themselves. Like, there has to be some process of peer review for code changes. But in terms of just getting that report fixed, like, I would say look at the report and prioritize. I mean, we can tell you exactly what on that report needs to be prioritized and go from there. If that's all you want is like, help me fix what's on this report, cool. We can prioritize, tell you what matters and what you can like push off.
Well, yeah, I mean, it should already have some sort of prioritization list in there, right?
By risk.
We rank that vulnerability report per risk, typically your high, medium, and low. But I mean, that's the direction I would push if a company is really serious about security and just doesn't have the cycles. Then instead of viewing us as a one-off, all right, we're going to come in and tell you what's wrong, let's dig deeper and actually give you the code, and you can actually show us what needs to be fixed, and then we can suck that in, or at least give that to the developer so they have a leg up when they go to fix that. I know we've tried to do that in the past with reports, like the whole
in
patch
the recommendations
level.
themselves. Yeah, include a fix in the recommendation because you have access to code. You can run it locally, you can patch it locally, and show them what it looks like.
Yeah, but not every organization is going to go to that level.
Right.
And when you're talking to those that are just looking for a compliance check, right?
Hey, they're like, low, fuck off. I'm not getting to you anytime soon.
Yeah, go to lows and mediums. Just go to the backlog, right?
Yeah,
that's the common refrain that I see. Is it and then it goes to the backlog and it stays there. And I mean, for us, unless it jumps up to a high severity finding,
right?
Is it really as interesting? And maybe that's where like the scoping from a bug bounty comes into play as well, right? The organization knows it's not going to care about any of that, so why are we paying for it? But,
well, the other issue is like, I hate like the one question I hate to being asked is to tell me which of these vulnerabilities I should fix first, and I don't know, right? Like if you think that whatever, that Equifax knew that the struts vulnerability was exploitable on their website and didn't fix it, that's one thing. But if it's my opinion that they knew that they had an out-of-date versions of struts, they didn't have POC code or any, any security person worth his salt with POC code is going to go show somebody and get it fixed, right? But most people have vulnerable frameworks or vulnerable software running in their network that they don't know how to exploit. And you can't fix everything. So you're like, yeah, okay, we know that needs to be fixed. So it does go in the backlog. But until you have a reason to say, hey, we need to stop what we're doing and fix this, you're just setting yourself up. So answering those what we should fix questions is just a fool's errand, because you don't pick the right thing and it's the thing that bites you, you look really dumb.
Yeah, and that's assuming you know about that infrastructure, because when you've got, because we were talking about the cloud, circling back to the cloud, when you've got 150 AWS accounts throughout your organization, you don't know what all you have. Like if you got 150 accounts or plus in AWS, and you know what all your assets are and the security status of them, like you're amazing. And you have just like you need to come on here and explain how. In fact, if you have that, please come on here and explain to us exactly how you did it.
So let me do two things. A, having multiple accounts in AWS, it was not designed to do it. And B, I don't want to turn this into commercial, but I just found an amazing tool that has really helped us do exactly that, right? To kind of manage across those accounts. And like it's cloud conformity. It's a new tool, and it runs like 300 or 400 checks against everything. And we're just in the middle of a POC, but we like it from what we've seen now, right? Like it hooks in with Jira and Slack and ServiceNow by default. So
Sweet. I'm looking at it right now. Well, awesome. Like, so that, well, fuck, I guess I was wrong. There you go. Jerry figured it out.
But anyway,
Jerry comes with all the things.
What's that?
Multiple accounts in the cloud it's not built for that, right? Like organizations, and it's ridiculous. And that's one of the things that I've struggled with as we move to the cloud. It's how to be secure across multiple accounts.
Yeah. Not an easy problem to solve. If anyone solved it, again, please come on this podcast. I'm being serious. Like, there might be somebody out there. I don't know. Keep an open mind on these things. Well, we've kept you on here long enough, and we appreciate your time, Jerry. Any parting thoughts anything you wanted to chat about, or anything you wanted to?
No, I just appreciate the time, and I appreciate all you guys have done for me and for the community over the last couple of years. It's always good to chat with you guys.
Same to you, man. You're always doing awesome stuff, releasing free code all the time. Like, you should check out Jerry Gamblin, his GitHub repo, all of his GitHub repos, his Twitter feed, because he's always releasing something. And it's at, I'll put the link in here. It's at J Gamblin.
Yep.
Let me put it in here.
Yeah, I mean, it's always fun to watch, right? And I mean, it always feels super relevant, Jerry. Like, that's what we appreciate about it, is that it spurs it spurs me to do more personally, right? And I think Ken as well. It's kind of a nice feedback loop to see other people actually working on stuff and the problems that they're solving, because we're all trying to solve the same things, but everybody's approach is a little bit different, which is nice to see.
I appreciate that. And yeah, I just write code for myself, and if somebody else can use it, that's just always that much better, I think.
I put the wrong link in there. Sorry, folks. But I'll when we post this video, I'll also put that in there. Apparently, the handle's case sensitive, I think is what it is. Anyways, thanks, Jerry. Really do appreciate you sharing your thoughts and your time.
No problem.
And
next, I think we should mention next week we are going to have Evan Phoenix on, or
Evan Johnson.
Evan Johnson, yeah. Sorry, too many Evans, yeah. That is a Rubyist. But yeah, Evan Johnson, excuse me. And because I think it was last episode, we were talking about, like I took sleeping pills and we're talking about cores almost at 10 o'clock at night. And it was like garbage. So he's going to sort that all out with us and talk about some of his research. And then we're just going to talk about whatever else. So.
And Jerry, come back on sometime soon.
Yes.
We'll chat.
I enjoyed this.
We enjoyed having you.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a good night.
Bye.